This podcast is part of the Democracy Group.
This kind of brings to mind that episode back in the, 2008 presidential election, where some Republican person in the audience stands up and starts taking shots at President or then candidate Obama. And John McCain says, wait a minute. Look, we're both Republicans here, but you're misconstruing this person who, yes, is my combatant, my opponent in this election, but I can't let you cast aspersions in that way on them. And in a certain sense, what we're going for is similar to that there would be a sense in which we can count on the two people that are having this conversation to, in a certain sense, have each other's back, so that if someone unfairly goes after their opponent, they will come to the defense of their opponent, their friend,
Yeah.
rather than allowing this to turn into a big, huge food fight.
The Village Square, a nervy bunch of liberals and conservatives who believe that disagreement and dialogue make for a good conversation, a good country, and a good time. At the Village Square, we talk about politics, religion, and race. You know, the topics your mom taught you never to discuss in polite company. Listen, at the Village Square, we make pigs fly.
Hey folks, welcome to Village Squarecast. This is Corey Nathan. I am so glad to be with you again. Thank you for joining us for this edition of the Flying Pig Academy, the core catalyst model, or what old trees have to teach us about rebuilding civic life. Village Squarecast is funded in part by the Federation of State Humanities Councils with support from the Mellon Foundation and Florida Humanities. In this conversation, we are joined again by Liz Joyner, our founder and CEO, and Bill Maddox, the former board chair of Village Square, who is the senior director of the J. Stanley Marshall Center for Education Freedom at the James Madison Institute. So I invite you to enjoy this wonderful conversation with Liz and Bill, also known as our Flying Pig Academy professors, and I'll see you on the other side.
Hi, everyone. I'm Liz Joyner. Welcome to Village Squarecast. And this is another riveting episode of Flying Pig Academy. And joining me again is Bill Maddox, whose day job is with James Madison Institute and who is a glutton for punishment. So he is is a former chair for the Village Square Board of Directors and just never leaves our orbit because we just can't let him. Welcome, Bill.
Thank you. I'm glad to be here.
So today's topic is our core catalyst model, and the title, Rocky and Bullwinkle style, is the core catalyst model, or what old trees have to teach us about rebuilding civic life. And this is, actually every time I present on core catalyst model, Bill, I say one day we'll think of a better name for it. So maybe you can help me think of a better name for it, because it's just not quite exciting enough or something. I don't know.
Well, the term may not be that sexy, but the idea is very exciting, and I am eager to have you really unpack this, because this is in many ways, in my mind, your baby. This is kind of the product of your thinking and really of just kind of your on the ground experience in putting together events and whatnot. So should we unpack the subtitle or the second title first about the old trees? Why don't you explain what you mean by that?
Yeah. So, it's weird. I think core catalyst is something that evolved over time. It's almost like we did it first and then we figured out what it is we were doing. And in many ways, it evolved from the choreography of building panels for programs, and that you were, really very intimately involved in helping us figure out. And so very often we would be aiming to take on a challenging topic. And I think a lot of times the natural way to do that as you build a panel is to just say, well, here is this group of people who think A, and then here is this group of people who think the opposite. So we just need a good representative from both groups. But that isn't how we found success building panels. Instead, we learned that we needed to start with one person who we thought was the one to have on that particular topic. And then we needed to create a small group around that person. And so in some ways, that's the seed of the very center of the tree, right? Is, if you were going to be our facilitator, then we would think who in your universe of humans disagrees with you on this topic, but who you have a foundational relationship with. And the harder the topic, the bigger the lift we knew we had, the more we would wait to get that first core relationship nailed.
Yeah, no, this is so important, is having, I mean, what we're really trying to do is replicate for a public event in a group of people that might be potentially hostile toward one another, the a private conversation that would be taking place among friends who happen to disagree. And so you can't really manufacture friendship overnight. And it's so what we then learned is you look for friendships that already exist among people who disagree. And then you basically, in a certain sense, ask them to have a conversation typical of what they would often have in their own living room or, over at the coffee shop or something, but to have it in a setting where, in a certain sense, others can listen in.
Yeah.
And so that core friendship or relationship, the feeling of goodwill between, if you, in a certain sense, the combatants, is, I think, critical to the success of the event. Is that
And-
fair?
Yes, absolutely. And in fact, you're reminding me of our regular instruction for our panelists. Once we had this core group pulled together, would be that what we're really going for is for our audience to feel like they were eavesdroppers in the moderator's living room, hanging out with friends, having a vibrant discussion.
Yeah.
And so we really wanted that informality and that relational that relational aspect of it. If we were going to and when we could nail it, we knew that we were going to have a fine discussion because of the fact that there was a relationship that was more important at the core of the disagreement than the disagreement was.
Yes. Yeah, and at times what that meant is that what you're kind of, in my mind, sort of looking for here is someone who will go to bat to defend their friend with whom they happen to disagree. If someone in the audience from the person's tribe were to attack them. And in some respects, this kind of brings to mind that episode back in the, what was it, 2008 presidential election, where some Republican person in the audience stands up and starts taking shots at President or then candidate Obama. And John McCain says, wait a minute. Look, we're both Republicans here, but you're misconstruing this person who, yes, is my combatant, my opponent in this election, but I can't let you cast aspersions in that way on them. And in a certain sense, what we're going for is similar to that there would be um, a sense in which we can count on the two people that are having this conversation to, in a certain sense, have each other's back, so that if someone unfairly goes after their opponent, they will come to the defense of their opponent, their friend,
Yeah.
rather than allowing this to turn into a big, huge food fight.
Yeah, yeah. And at the core of that is the fact that if you tap into the human superpower to be in relationship with each other, then you've got a tailwind. You're not facing the usual headwind that exists when there is no relationship when you're online. And in many ways, I'd argue, based on our experience, that one of the biggest problems we have is simply that we're not grounded in those relationships in the same way that we used to.
No, I think you're exactly right. Is that yeah, these connections can sometimes be harder or hard to find it, and I think they're becoming harder to find just because, like you say, we are unfortunately not sufficiently connected. So really, in a lot of ways, then what happens is that yes, people in the audience end up being exposed to content arguments from the other side, so to speak, that they may never have heard. But at least as important as that, potentially, is the fact that they get to see two people who disagree very strongly modeling the kind of civil discourse and constructive dialogue that we want to foster. And in many ways, I think I don't know what you whether what you'd say to this, but in many ways, I think that modeling is that is as important as the content exchange.
Absolutely.
Um, because that we don't see. We do if you really want to expose yourself to the arguments of the other side, there are news channel so-called news channels that you can tune into and hear the
Yeah.
argument, but rarely will you see a constructive exchange. And I tell you where this really has me concerned, and boy, I'm going to sound like an old man here, but I think for a lot of younger um people in our culture who have grown up in an age where this sort of kind of food fight television and food fight discourse has been commonplace. I think it is um often um uh, um just kind of outside the realm of their understanding or thinking to see the kinds of conversations that were actually quite commonplace when I was young and, have in many ways kind of faded away. And so part of what we're doing in a certain sense is just reviving good old fashioned civic discourse and neighbors who feel a connection to one another by friendship, by simply living in the same town together and whatnot, can have constructive conversations, even though they may very strongly disagree.
Yeah, I absolutely agree, and that's been, my experience as well. And, if you don't see it, how do you know what it looks like? In our work on college campuses, that's been one of the focuses is students say, "I have no idea
Right.
how to even proceed here."
Yeah. Yeah.
Um, and and those relationships really did exist very deeply across differences. I remember, my best friend's father growing up, as I know I've told you this story, but was Vice President Agnew's press secretary. Um, he got out right out. He left right before things got bad, which
Mm,
is kind of interesting,
yeah.
but really good man and had politics different than my family's. And I remember very vividly, we picked him up at the airport, and so he's a very strong conservative. And, he ran into Eugene McCarthy, the, former, very, very liberal presidential candidate. And I remember, as a young person watching them interact with real respect and collegiality between each
Mm,
other. Made a real impression on me.
mm,
And those relationships really did exist all the way, from from my government classes
mm,
to the halls of Congress.
yeah. So I've heard you speak about this man and this family, but I did not know the Eugene McCarthy stories. That's great. I'm really glad you shared that. But yeah,
Yeah.
no, this was This was once common. It has faded, but we can revive it. That's what we're all about.
Let's face it, our democracy is facing fundamental threats. Many of our government's critical checks and balances are being dismantled, challenged, or outright ignored. I'm Simone Leeper, host of Democracy Decoded, a podcast from Campaign Legal Center. This season, we're focused on specific weak points in American democracy, how they're being exploited, and the innovative solutions that can reverse this downward spiral and strengthen our nation. Look for Season 5 of Democracy Decoded wherever you get your podcasts.
All right, so we've talked some about the kind of way that you start the process of building a panel and finding a person that you think is going to be key, and then building around them and looking to a good, strong relationship with someone of the opposite tribe, so to speak. But oftentimes our panels will include more than just one or two people. So tell me how you then kind of build from there.
Well, so I didn't quite, I guess, get to the rings. So thank you for that. I got to the little core ring. But if you think about, as a tree grows, you need to have that healthy start, the little sapling. And then, when you cut the cross section of a tree, you can see the years of the tree as it grows. And so that that core relationship is the key. And sometimes that's a relationship, actually, when we build panels or programs that exist between more than one, more than two people. Sometimes it's a group of people. So in some ways, the Village Square, how we've grown entirely has been using the core catalyst model, because we originally were founded based on the friendships of a group of 5 politically diverse local leaders who I had the opportunity to observe in discussions about what they disagreed with. And they were not just more informative, they were also way more entertaining. Because they were grounded in friendships that were going to survive the discussion. So they could have, they could tease each other, they could, I remember one time one of them said to the other, "There you go again with your commie pinko argument." Anyway, so that core doesn't have to be just two. It just has to be a strong, stable relationship. And sometimes it's we actually keep constructing those rings as the group grows out, by virtue of using what we've spoken about before in this podcast, crisscrossy, cross-cutting relationships. And so, for example, with the board, we started with that group of 5 people, or with the Village Square, and growing our first board. We asked them not to bring the person who agreed with them politically to join the board. We asked them, think of someone who you fundamentally disagree with and you have a solid relationship with. And that's how we then grew it bigger, grew the next ring out.
Yeah.
And in fact, then once we had our board of directors, we essentially made the same ask to then grow a group of 75 founders, is what we called them. And, we issued invitations to this 75 group of people. And again, that was our way of then growing the next ring of the tree out, because we knew that when we asked our, 15-member board, think of people who you disagree with who could be involved in this endeavor. We were building we were weaving a fabric of relationships on which to grow this organization as we went. And by the time we got to 75 that joined us for a big party and kind of an introduction party that we had way back in 2006 or 7, I was 10 at the time. We had, 200 people in the room, who we knew were politically diverse. So that's how you grow the tree.
Yeah. No, that's great. And what strikes me too about this, getting back to kind of the core, and then building out from there. There was as I was listening to you talk, the one of the images that came to mind was like, I don't know, going to a dinner party, or even in a certain sense, like Thanksgiving at grandma's. There's a sense in which the host and whoever's hosting the dinner is going to kind of set the tone for everything. And if you see people who are enjoying one another, maybe like you say, teasing one another and kind of keeping each other honest, then that gives permission to others to kind of go and do likewise. But if you also see them staying within certain boundaries and not allowing the conversation to go in directions that would be unhealthy, that doesn't mean not having difficult conversations. It means not getting involved in name calling and other sorts of unconstructive behavior. Then if the core is doing that and setting the tone, then it's less likely that others will kind of resort to that sort of behavior that we actually see more often in our public life than the behavior that is being modeled in front of them.
Absolutely. And in fact, I think in some ways this was kind of an upside surprise to me in running this organization. I do remember after we did all this building and the rings of the tree and what we now see as Core Catalyst, we had our big first public event in which I had no idea who would show up. None, right? And I remember thinking, oh my gosh, this could go terribly. We could be in the newspaper tomorrow about how this group dedicated to civil discourse had a scrum. um, but on the upside, what we've learned is that if that core really exists, it absolutely can manage its way through almost anything.
Yeah.
And in fact, the rings of the tree go both out as you grow, and then they sometimes go back in as you need to kind of check back in and make sure your foundation is solid. Because, this group of agreeable disagreeers at the core are operating in a very challenging environment like all the rest of us are. And so there have been a few times when, we've had a big public event that involved this core of people, and it was a little dicey, a little more difficult, and we'll actually shrink the group back again and touch base before we go back out again.
It's good. That's really good. Also, we've also in some ways dealt with the opposite problem, and this might even be worth a whole episode in its of its own. But that is, you can have people so mindful of the need to be respectful and kind of on their best behavior that they become almost too agreeable for the purposes of having and modeling a constructive disagreement. And so there are times when I know, as moderator for some of these, where I've had to kind of look for a way to prod people to to disagree more aggressively, just because everyone is in danger of being too nice.
Yeah, I think that's right. And in fact, that's been a challenge that we've had to face because in some ways what we do works so well, right? Because the relationship is the most important thing to in most of these circumstances. And so we have to sort of juice the disagreement a little bit. Remember, you guys don't agree.
Well, and I think this is where it's important not just for the audience, if you will, to perceive themselves as eavesdropper. I really love that concept. But
It's so much sexier, isn't it, than just in the room with?
No, yes, they are eavesdroppers, but what part of the challenge too then is to get the panelists to really, um, in a certain sense, tune out the larger audience and actually have the kind of authentic conversation that they would have, because that that tendency to sometimes be too nice can sometimes come from a recognition that you are in a public setting, and 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 you're mindful of appearing to have bad manners, when what we really want is for you to know, just do what you do in your regular life. You're friends, you get along, you tease each other, crack jokes at each other's expense and at your own, and just do that rather than viewing this as a performance or a public debate or something like that.
Absolutely. And in fact, one of our other instructions to our panels is to interrupt each other. Because that's what you do in real life, right? And
That's
and
good.
when you're having sort of a formal panel in front of an audience, there's such a tendency to have it be person to facilitator, facilitator to person to, et cetera. And that isn't the way you have normal conversations. And so we really want our panels to kind of forget too.
Yeah, I'm really kicking myself here listening to you, because I so badly wanted to interrupt your last comment with something witty, and I just couldn't come up with anything. So forgive me. I'm not a very good panelist today.
Yeah, that is perfect. It's true. It's just the way it goes, and so we remind them. Um, so I feel like no conversation that includes this core catalyst model can continue without us talking about our opus for core catalyst, and that is local color. Uh,
Mm.
and you were involved in that. So I want to maybe lay that out a little bit, and you can throw in some on sort of how that experience was for you. So Local Color was a project that its roots started back after the Trayvon Martin tragedy, which felt very personal and local to us because it was nearby, and at the same time, Knight Foundation was kind of asking the question, what do we do in communities about race relations? And um, we have had we have not had the kind of participation um, that we'd like to see among younger people of color. Starting then, and so we thought it was really important to start this programming. And so, Local Color, the idea behind it was that we were going to meet um, when the temperature was high and create relationships that could survive that kind of disagreement. But first, we had to build them. And so there wasn't really an existing there there. There was, some relationships that we started with, but really we built that group of a core, about 10 people is who was involved. And we did it in the same order, but we're very thoughtful about getting younger people of color engaged at that core level. And then we grew it from there, and then we grew it a little bit more, and we ended up having a solid, amazing core of people who could have the most amazing discussions with each other before we went public.
Yeah, in many ways, the process, and I saw this one unfold, the creation of the organization and what you did at the very outset with the founders and all of that preceded my time in Tallahassee. So I came in very soon after things had been set in motion, but I wasn't involved in that kind of process, um, creation of the larger enterprise. But I did see the Local Color, and it strikes me that there were just almost eerie similarities in some ways between the two, where yes, you set out to try to accomplish something that was pretty daring and not easy, and you were mindful of some of the places where you needed to give special attention, and then began with friendships that existed already but just had never been, in a certain sense, organized into a group. Because one of the things that I love about what you've done with the Village Square is that you've kind of taken groups of people who think of themselves as members of this tribe or that tribe or this group or that group, and said, okay, great. we're not going to ask you to renounce your membership in those groups. We just want you to buy into the idea that we're going to create a tribe here of people of goodwill who see the world differently, but want to have constructive conversations, and really much more than that, have true, deep, real friendships, even though we may disagree. And so yeah, when it came to this, you said, all right, let's start with existing friendships and then invite people to kind of join this local colored tribe, if you will. And for me, it was a really kind of thrilling process to see that whole thing unfold. You assembled some really great people, so that was, a big part of it. But then just some of the conversations behind the scenes that I got to witness, you know, were just amazing, as that group would come together and plan, the next public conversation that we wanted to have, an event we wanted to do. So, yeah, there's just a lot to this idea of starting with core friendships of people who love each other but don't see the world exactly the same way, and then building out from there.
Yeah, and I don't give myself a lot of credit for assembling these groups of people. I ask,
Oh.
right? And in some ways, sort of the group we got a core friendship group in that was politically and racially diverse by virtue of asking people who were already involved. It's like, who else, would really be a part of it? And some of those people who I didn't know at all before we
Right.
started this, I would count as real friends now. And it just, as things have gotten so bad around us, contrasting it with what can happen when you invest, that kind of work in building relationships across, existing groups. And actually, you're talking about some of the conversations we've had. The one that just tickles me that I remember so vividly, um, but it was pretty representative of really all of our conversations, is when we were toying with the idea of having a program that it was something like, are white liberals unintentionally slowing racial progress? And we were kicking around the idea. It was my idea to begin with, and I kind of asked the group. And this is a very racially and age diverse, and politically diverse group of people. And it was just the reaction we got mainly from Black conservatives, I would say, but from it was it got to the point where it was actually hysterical, because they would go, we had one person came in late, and we described what was going on to him, a Black conservative man, and he said, "Oh my gosh, yes!" and, and since I'm a white liberal, at some point I said, "Look, y'all like this topic way too much. We can't do it."
Well, it was a really great idea because there was a local controversy that was being written about in the newspaper and talked about on the local radio stations and stuff, that, as I recall, involved like the the cutting down trees in a historically Black neighborhood. And there was one group of people that was undoubtedly overrepresented with kind of white liberals who said we can't ever cut down trees. And there were others who were like, wait a minute, there are um, considerations here, beyond just environmental ones, that people in the African American community felt. And I think just felt in some ways like people outside their neighborhoods were making decisions about what ought to happen in their neighborhood. So
Yeah.
anyway, it was tied to a local kind of controversy. And yeah, you threw out that idea, and that was one of the most fascinating experiences really of my entire life, because it was like you had lit a match and all of a sudden fireworks start shooting off in all
Fireworks.
directions.
Yes. So
And
much
it wasn't.
honesty.
Yeah, and my sense of it was that, uh, it wasn't a left-right, conflict so much as it was maybe in some sense a black-white sort of where there was a sense where um whether one was a black conservative or a black progressive, there was a kind of universal sense that there are certain groups of white people that will often, with very good intentions, want to kind of step in and say, we think we know what's best for you. And, there was a certain amount of resentment that we saw that kind of surfaced with that. And what it was one of those things where it was a kind of, it, it accomplished, that conversation in my mind accomplished something that we're constantly going for, which is that our ultimate objective here isn't necessarily to get you to agree with someone else or even to find some sort of policy compromise at one of our events that we can all agree on. It's really just to help people understand where others are coming from. And I, I find that when people better understand, even if they don't agree, they will nevertheless feel a desire to kind of move toward someone of goodwill who has a grievance that they had just kind of blown off or tuned out, that now, even though they may not share the ultimate perspective on, can say, I get it. I understand better. And now I can maybe chew on ways in which some, resolution could be found to this that would satisfy everyone or satisfy a larger group of people. And
Yeah.
that's to me, what you want is for people to, at the very least, come away with a greater understanding. And I think with that, you'll then see the potential for solutions that no one would have imagined at the outset.
Yeah, and so many conversations just don't get anywhere near that far,
Yeah.
right? That
Yeah.
they require this kind of core relational work to get to the point where you can have that conversation that was so deeply real. Um, and it meant that the black conservative and little old me white liberal, we kind of we got some interview requests ahead of this
Mm.
program, and so we did an NPR interview together.
No, it's great.
In which, exactly what you're talking about, which is we had this real conversation. I understood better where he was coming from. I also then experienced the interview through his eyes in a
Mm.
way that was revelatory, really. I kind
Mm.
of went, "Oh, this is how it feels to be
Mm.
conservative and black in this particular
Mm.
circumstance." And
Interesting.
so there's just there's no substitute for that, because I think once you have that moment where you see something new, you keep understanding it better.
Yeah.
Um yeah.
One of the things that I was thinking about when you first introduced the whole topic of local color and kind of how it came about and all the rest is, and there's no way we can ever really know this question, but one of the things that I started wondering about was like, um, would it have been possible to have created local color if Village Square didn't exist first? And I'm sure it probably could happen, but there is a sense in which I do think the fact that you had already kind of established a footprint when it came to Village Square and having political discourse between liberals and conservatives that could be constructive and effective, that I think that helped greatly when it came time both to do local color and, for that matter, to do God Squad. When we delved into these other topics that you're not supposed to talk about in polite conversation, race and religion, the fact that a beachhead had already been established and there was already a kind of consciousness within the community that this is how we roll in this place, I think that was a big help. And so I guess what I would say to others is, wherever you may begin, if you have a desire to tackle more than just one of these taboo topics, recognize that your success in that first endeavor could then help lead to success in other endeavors
Yeah.
in other realms. Because I definitely think that happened with us.
Yeah, I think that's absolutely right. And
And let me give you let me interrupt
yes, please do.
and give you a concrete example of this. Jovita, who was so important to local color, is someone that was already on your radar and had already participated in Village
Yes.
Square prior to the creation of local color. And so I think she was able, along with others, to kind of set the tone for what local color would be like, because she had seen and had bought into the sort of pattern that you had established with Village Square.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. It's exactly right. It also makes me think of Peter Coleman, who's an expert. I believe he's at Columbia, but he's written a book called The Way Out of extreme conflict, and he wrote about something called the butterfly effect, which is essentially how you start something is so foundational to how it continues. And I think, what you're describing makes me think of how the core catalyst model is basically is understands that you're trying to go someplace hard and that how you start it is everything. And it changes the trajectory completely to exercise a lot of care as you
Yeah.
start it. And the thing is then, we didn't exactly talk about, so this core group of people with local color had such strong relationships that the panels for each of our public programs, where we bring 150 people in the room, were made up of primarily these core relationships. It wasn't always, 100% all 4 or 5 of the panelists were in that solid core original group. But they always made the foundation of it. And so what that meant is that the people just coming into the room could feel that unique ability of this group of people to really go real.
Yeah.
And they could also feel the respect despite the disagreement. And so that people, and so that's an example of, you start it thoughtfully, and then it's like falling off a log easy in many ways,
Yep.
because the whole room feels it. I'll tell you another example of how we use the core catalyst model to build a huge room of people every year, and that is with Created Equal. Our now we've done 10 years of this annual
Yep.
program with Leon County government, and the way that we do that is we have about 15 to 20 tables, round tables in the middle of this huge 4 to 500 person location that we do this event at. And we just have 15 or 20 people who we know, and we invite them to stretch inside their network. So we don't ask them to bring 7 people who agreed with them to sit at their table. We ask them to think of people who don't agree with them to invite out. And everybody knows somebody like that, right?
Yeah.
And so there's that core catalyst again, and we're making like a core catalyst all the tables, and then by virtue of that, the 300 or 400 more people who sign up for this event are always, it's a very diverse group of people.
Yep. Yeah, no, it's a great model. I'm so glad that I've been exposed to it on the ground thanks to your leadership, and hats off to you for this, and I hope others will benefit from it, and I look forward to future conversations with you about these sort of things.
Here's hoping. Thanks for hanging out, Bill.
Hey, thank you. Really
See you
appreciate
next
it,
time.
Liz.
Bye.
All right, bye-bye.
All right, Corey Nathan back here with you. As usual, Liz and Bill really delivered. I love listening to their conversations. They delivered on exactly what they were talking about. I felt like I was in the room with Liz and Bill listening in on this. They were writing the playbook for how to nurture relationships, how to put on successful events, and how to build an organization at all of those levels: relationships, events, organizations. And what were some of the principles that I was drawing from this conversation? One was simply putting relationships over any disagreements. What disagreements are worth cutting off relationships? Now, a lot of times we ask ourselves that. We get in a spat on Facebook and we ask ourselves, do I unfriend this person? Do I block this person? But, when it's somebody in my family, my neighbor, somebody I'm going to see on the soccer field, where our kids are playing soccer or something like that, or run into at the Chamber of Commerce meeting or what have you, relationships over disagreements. And when it comes to the question of organizing events, for those of us who want to do this and replicate this in our communities, there is some great wisdom here. Duplicating private conversations for public consumption. I thought that was a great pearl of wisdom here in terms of how to start conceiving of an event that we invite others to. It's similar, actually. As I hope you know by now, I love podcasting. So I've always thought of the best podcasts are when interesting people get together and have an intimate conversation that they invite others to listen in on. And as someone who listens to a lot of podcasts, just like I did here with Liz and Bill, I felt like I was in the room with them. That's what we're inviting people into in podcasts. And when we organize events, that's really what we're trying to do, have speakers who are candid and real and authentic and connect authentically. And we're inviting others to participate in those intimate conversations. I was also thinking of, I had a chance to meet Jessie Tarlov, and she related a lot of times off camera, and sometimes we see it on camera, the real connection that she has with her colleagues on The Five. It's a very popular show on Fox News. And what often gets shared are those clips where her and Greg Gutfeld are going at it. And, they're fighting and they're yelling and all of that. It's what sells, I guess, right? But I am much more interested. I was much more compelled by, sometimes we see it on camera where they reconnect as human beings and they have an authentic, candid connection, an intimate connection, if you will. And Jessie was sharing with a small group of us that she has a lot of those connections. She really has, those relationships are real. I guess I wish that sold, or at least that Fox News or other broadcasters, other folks in the media, in social media, understood that sells too. That fires me up. I would much sooner watch a lot more of those real connections with people who have differences than I want to spend, getting angry at, so-and-so yelling at this other person. So maybe that's just my taste. Maybe it's just my rose-colored glasses that I'm looking through. But as Bill put it, I long for reviving good old-fashioned civic discourse. Or the way that Liz put it, weaving a fabric of relationships. That's how to build an organization for those of us who are also interested in doing this sort of work. What a great conversation. I took a lot from it, and I'm going to start applying it at least to, so what I do in podcasting is, as well as I'm going to keep it in mind in terms of the organizations that I'm involved with. Really great pearls of wisdom, like I said. So with that, it's time to close out today. Please consider joining our members and supporting this programming. You can become a member for just $7 a month or $76 a year, and your business can join for $250. Go to villagesquare.us/donate. That's villagesquare.us/donate to join today. And while you're there, sign up for Village Square's newsletter to stay up to date with everything happening at the Village Square. Just go to villagesquare.us, villagesquare.us, and scroll to the bottom for the sign-up box. There's also a pop-up box that comes up when you go to the website. So it's great events coming up this year. Really excited about that. Village Squarecast is funded in part by the Federation of State Humanities Councils with support from the Mellon Foundation and Florida Humanities. Any views, findings, conclusions, or recommendations expressed in this program do not necessarily represent those of Florida Humanities. Learn more about Florida Humanities online at floridahumanities.org. We appreciate you listening to the Core Catalyst model, or what old trees have to teach us about rebuilding civic life. Until next time, we challenge you to reach out with an open heart and mind to someone who doesn't think or look like you. It changes everything. We'll talk to you soon, and thanks so much for listening to Village Squarecast.